as much as I have missed you, because I'll be honest, these last few weeks we've done encores. Our hosts and myself have been busy doing all sorts of really cool stuff, and with the holidays, it's always a little chaotic, but I'm excited because tonight we are covering a topic that, and I know I always usually say near and dear to my heart, but I do mean it specifically because this time of year for me, Sarah Soderlund, your host, or you might know me as Paranormal Sarah. This time of year is the time of year that we are doing grants. I spoke in myself of the plural. That's kind of strange. But I spend this time of year doing grants and scholarships and things for 2016 that are usually due just shortly after the new year. And one of the independent research studies that I have been working on for the last few months, and it's kind of really amped up in the last few weeks, especially because one of my colleagues with the Parapsychological Association over in the UK had some really neat links and networking peeps to send my way. And so just talking with people in the psychology community and in the forensics community, one of my independent research programs is about the language of a psychopath. So for those of you who have never tuned in to Mysteries of the Mind, firstly, shame on you. But secondly, this is a show where predominantly we spend about 60 minutes, give or take the breaks and intros, to spend with you and to explore your mind and to explore hot topics in forensic psychology and parapsychology and delve into things like conspiracy theory and profiling and philosophy and topics like what is evil. And some of those you can always go and check back in. I've got a YouTube channel you can listen to, you can download on IPBN. There's all sorts of places you can go to find archived shows, or you can always email me directly or find me online at sarahsoderlund.com. But my favorite way to listen to the shows here on Intrepid or IPBN Radio is the TuneIn app. You can listen mobily. And so I usually am kind of trolling my fellow hosts, especially my producer Rocky on his shows. They get very fired up on Sunday nights, and you can just kind of sit back and listen. And so I hope that's what you're doing tonight with me, wherever you are in the world. Tonight's topic is graphology, or handwriting analysis, kind of the pseudoscience study of the analysis of handwriting in relation to human psychology. And so I really hope that wherever you're at, you have an opportunity to possibly write something down and delve into yourself, as weird as that sounds. As a Chuck Palahniuk fan, maybe a Fight Club fan, maybe I would say the only form of self-improvement is masturbation, as they say. So I want you to take a moment to write something down, and I want you to write, this is usually the phrase I have my clients write, with a pen and paper or pencil and paper. Again, we're not typing this, we're writing it because it's handwriting analysis or graphology. But I want you to write the words, my favorite insect is, and then fill in your favorite insect. I can't answer that for you. My favorite insect is, and put your, whether it's a period or an exclamation point or an ellipses, whatever it is you like to do to end that sentence. And then just leave it there. Maybe you can even sign your name at the bottom. I especially love signatures, so maybe go ahead and do that. You can sign your name at the bottom there. Just give me a little autograph. And I can tell you that not only do I appreciate graphology and handwriting analysis as someone who does assessments for mental health, but just in divination as well. For me, because it's a pseudoscience, because it's kind of, I say wishy-washy, but to me it's very, very, very much an appendage of ourselves. It really gives some enlightenment into the person. And it's kind of as an extension of that passion of mine. Now, again, if you've listened to Mysteries of the Mind before, you know that here on the show, I dig into my deep love and affection for neurolinguistic programming. And neurolinguistic programming is kind of taking apart and dissecting the brain and the ways of communication and language. And it can mean verbal cues as well as nonverbal cues, but specifically, as I mentioned, my research paper is on the language of a psychopath. And so I want to kind of give you an introduction into that, if you will. Maybe it's something that you are not familiar with. Maybe it's completely new to you. So I want you to just sit back in your chair and, with your permission, of course, I want you to just open your mind a little bit and tell me how this marinates with you. What do you think, right? Well, the assessment and treatment of psychopathy in America is still very much in the stages of infancy. And so continued research and understanding the mind of a violent psychopathic offender is ongoing, right? Now, limited research with interrogation and interviewing leaves the opportunity for growth in many, many ways. And for this paper, I've learned that there have been, especially in the mid-90s, 1993 to 1998, you see this huge kind of burst. When I say huge, I mean maybe 7 or 8 studies of psychopathy in linguistics and communication. And a lot of it is with interrogation and interviewing. It's actual personal, sit down, face to face, the life of David Gale kind of through the glass discussions. But with this opportunity for growth, I want you to think of the non-personal use of handwriting analysis for language, right? Because not only is handwriting analysis used in helping to determine a personality profile by examining characteristics and traits that illuminate internal individual personality indicators, but it also might further illuminate that of the psychopath, the things that are kind of kept in the dark to what we understand about their mind. So my paper really illustrates kind of ongoing research and firsthand correspondence with some of our nation's most violent psychopathic offenders, and it analyzes not only their handwriting, but their language and their communication style. So with neurolinguistic programming and handwriting analysis, I kind of hope to unveil patterns in the language of the psychopath. And there are some papers, most of which you have to pay for online to read, by Robert Hare and his colleagues. Robert Hare is, of course, the creator of the PCLR, Psychopathic Checklist Revised. It's the one predominantly used tool for measuring psychopathy when you have someone who is diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, or APD. And usually you see this as kind of this diagnosis that they have these high levels of psychopathy. They've scored high on the PCLR and their antisocial personality. But what we know of the psychopath is their manipulation, their ability to be charming and just things moving out of their mouth in a very sexy, sensual way that gets them what they want, right? But does this manipulation and callous demeanor continue throughout handwritten letters with an anonymous interested party? Me. So I've been doing correspondence with some of these violent offenders for the past 6 months, and I'm going to be amping it up in 2016, hopefully with a grant. If you know someone with money, send them my way. Shameless plug there. But I'm going to be kind of expanding upon this and gaining more and more correspondence as I have time before school in June. And something I find really fascinating is that a key feature of psychopathy, right, is this ability to deceive and manipulate and con and to be perfectly sincere, cold, callous, and yet void of empathy. And these are all characteristics that are described in Robert Hare's checklist. And there are factors that you kind of go through when you're assessing psychopathy for an individual. But so much of it is about this cunning, manipulative ability. But does it extend beyond the verbal and beyond the nonverbal cues? And does it extend into handwriting? Is the impression of sincerity achieved solely through body gestures and facial expressions, mimicking? Or can more be determined through handwriting of a psychopath? So I'm interested in what you think. Do you think that there is something to be learned from the handwriting of a psychopath? Now, from what I've been able to find, there is a very small handful of research studies that have been done similar to or graphology research on psychopaths. And some of what they have to say is quite fantastic. And so what we're going to talk about tonight is some of the word usage, the neurolinguistics of word usage. And also we're going to touch base with that handwritten sentence that you did for me. Hopefully you did that right. My favorite insect is, and signed it for me, gave me your autograph. Because I want to just go through the basics of graphology and give you just a little introduction into handwriting analysis, because for me it is absolutely fascinating. So, true psychopaths have a disregard for rules. Are you a rule breaker? They have poor impulse control. They're risk takers. And they show usually a total disregard for the feelings and even the needs of others. So how selfish are you? They can also be charming, at least superficially, and are extremely good at mimicking emotions. Now that's very key. One of my favorite books, The Science of Evil, talks about the actual neuropsychology, the biology of the brain, the anatomy of what's going on in the body and how things are working in the mind of a psychopath. And it really takes empathy to the next level. And it talks about how, and through some research, CAT scans and other brain scans of psychopaths, they're being shown these pictures of faces and who's happy and who's not, and looking at a picture of a happy person, and they don't necessarily have any light up in their brain. Their amygdala isn't functioning normally as, quote unquote, I'm using quotation fingers there, like the majority are. They literally don't regulate their emotions, but instead, usually they're mimicking emotions. So often they can fool you into thinking that they are showing pity or remorse or guilt or empathy. And what's unique, if you're like a fan of Dexter, is that they're logically, rationally, intellectually completely aware that they should feel this way. Like, man, why do I love my sister? I should love my sister. I'm attached to my sister. I would definitely have a reaction if she just suddenly disappeared. But is it selfish and is it self-centered? Is it all about you, or is there a genuine empathy there? Is there a connection that extends beyond yourself? Is there a selflessness there to which you love people? Well, psychopaths, in fact, usually, I use that word lightly, are not capable of feeling the spectrum of emotions, and therefore they are doing a lot of acting. They're mimicking, pretending, and kind of wearing the mask to fit in. And they usually do want to fit in because, again, they're very self-driven and they want to be successful. Part of being successful is, of course, getting along with others, teamwork. If you're the CEO, being able to delegate. There has to be interpersonal skills there, and usually they're learned through the mimicking of emotions. But their words, specifically, and this is where we touch on handwriting, right? This extension of our communication. Their words reflect their personalities. If you listen to a person, if you're listening to me now, the words that I'm using, they illuminate my personality. They can absolutely show you the level of selfish or selfishness that I have. They can illustrate how detached I am from a crime. They illustrate the emotional flatness. And it's fantastic when you look at, there was actually in the Journal of Legal and Criminological Psychology in 2011, they did research on the language usage. I want to touch on this for a second because it's fascinating, that psychopaths behave as if the world is to be used for their benefit. They employ deception and feigned emotion to manipulate others. The words of the experimental subjects in this research matched the descriptions perfectly. Psychopaths use more conjunctions like because, since, so that. It's implying that their crimes had to be done to obtain a particular goal. There's a lot of cause and effect. So they actually use twice as many words relating to a physical need, such as food, sex, money, whereas a non-psychopath will use more words about social needs, family, religion, spirituality. If you're asking a psychopath, why did you do this? Can you describe for me the crime? Which is one of the things I do in my correspondence, by the way. It's fantastic to see the conjunction, how many conjunctions are used. How many of you are going, conjunction, function, what's your function? Because I do. You circle them, and you start circling what's going on in the mind. You start circling the linguistics. You circle the adjectives, the verbs, the nouns. This is where I go back to Miss Becker, my freshman year of English in high school, and I think this is when I will use this. This is when knowing the pronouns versus nouns is important. Psychopaths tend to, at least in my research, use more pronouns. They're completely detached. His, her, theirs, ours. They're using, they're not going to say my brother, John. Instead, they might say he. And you have to clarify, who are you talking about? He. Oh, well, John, my brother. And they're consistently referencing people in their lives that would be close family or friends or even victims as a distant being separate from themselves. Now, psychopaths were actually more likely to use past tense, suggesting detachment from crime as well. Whether or not that's a coping mechanism, it's still very much in research that they don't feel guilt or they don't have the ability to feel guilt or their unconscious removes guilt. They talk about things in the past tense. They tend to be less fluent in their speech, using more and which that was in the research done by Cornell University. I actually don't find that to be true because, again, I'm doing handwriting. So in handwriting, you don't have the personal use of spacers. In public speech, or if you ever take a speech class, they talk about spacers. When you're acting or when you're making something up or when you're lying, we learn this in interrogation techniques, ums, uhs, and other personal spacers are used. And automatically it kind of is a flag for that this person is trying to fill in the gaps. They're thinking a little too hard. For example, if I'm, talking kind of like this, and I'm kind of struggling to, maybe come up with the word I'm looking for. A lot of smacking, a lot of spacers are used, and it really exhibits that I'm uncomfortable and I'm unfamiliar with what it is that I'm talking about. So I've actually found, I have found differences in my research with that. I don't find that psychopaths use as many spacers in handwriting because obviously handwriting, you can allow time. You can lift the pen or pencil from the paper and take your time as needed. You don't need a spacer. So it's a little bit more difficult to differentiate manipulation. The exact reason for spacers, of course, in psychopathy isn't completely clear, but they say that it's harder to make a positive impression and needs to use more mental effort to frame a story that's not true, or even to frame a story for a psychopath's case that doesn't have any emotional attachment, which is fantastic because the language of the brain, for the majority of us, we are extremely emotional creatures. The majority of our interpersonal verbal communication is adjectives. When we describe our food that we're eating, we're not just sitting across the table saying, this chicken's really good. Instead, we're saying, man, you did a great job with this chicken. It's so juicy. I love it. And you know what? I love that sauce, whatever that sauce you used. Man, it's really sweet. We have an attachment, an emotional dance that we're doing. And if you are a reader, someone who enjoys literature in your spare time, or you have the spare time to read, you'll notice that authors like Rowling's or even King is one of my favorites that does this, or J.D. Robe even. They use adjectives to the point that it's almost all that you're reading, but it is so descriptive that it brings you into that narrative. There's hardly any quotes. There's hardly any conversation. Instead, it's just descriptive language that really takes you there, and it builds the story, and it paints the picture, and it makes it much more interesting. And interestingly enough, psychopaths don't use adjectives nearly at all, unless it's selfish adjectives. What do I mean by that? Selfish adjectives are typically things about, well, have you ever heard of Jack the Ripper? Well, of course I have. Who hasn't heard of Jack the Ripper? Well, what do you think of Jack the Ripper? Who do you think did it? Well, clearly it was a doctor or maybe even a doctor who is developmentally disabled, because if I had done that, I definitely wouldn't have made a mess out on the sidewalk. All the blood and all the gore and even the grape seeds is a little sloppy. I would definitely have done that differently. They almost adopt the crime like a little baby and begin to selfishly describe themselves in the first person of how they would have done it differently, which is completely different than someone who is a non-violent, non-psychopathic individual who engages in neutral banter or neutral conversation, like that old ping pong game you used to play on Atari. That might age me a little bit. But that's kind of a normal conversation, right? Bing, bing, bing. It goes back and forth. Now, if you dig a little deeper and you ask questions like, how did it feel when you found out she'd been murdered? A true psychopath will struggle to give a detailed description of how they felt. It reminds me of Equilibrium, right? Christian Bale just standing there. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, right? The answer was something like, well, it was distressing. It was sad. But they don't necessarily describe a physical response like, well, it felt like my heart had been ripped out, like a piece of me was gone, right? They describe a completely different physical response. Ooh, somebody's calling me. That's never happened. Hold on a second. Ah! Wow. The universe. Someone is calling me. But they don't describe any physical responses. Instead, they just seem, again, cold and callous, much like their brain reacts under a CAT scan in regards to emotion or empathy. And if you push them on point, they might exhibit some anger, but that's usually because it's a fear of being exposed, or frustration, or impatience. They're not completely emotionless, and I think that that's one of the struggles that I have with Hollywood and the picture that they've painted of the popular pop culture psychopath. Or when you watch movies like Equilibrium, if you've not seen that, shame on you. To be emotionless would mean that you don't have any emotion, that you would be so flat you don't have anger or frustration or volatile, violent tendencies. But we do, they do, right? So what's wrong with them? Well, one of my favorite authors, I consider him a mentor, he would probably laugh at that, is James Fallon, who wrote In the Mind of the Psychopath. And it is his own narrative of finding out that his genetic family lineage had some murderous, volatile people, and that he did a brain scan. He's a neuropsychologist out of California, and he found out, oh my gosh, I have some of the brain scans of a psychopath. Maybe I'm a little psychopathic. And he did some interviewing and assessment on himself and had family anonymously describe him. And he did learn that he was cold and callous compared to the norm. And he kind of describes this, what is it like? What does that mean for me? Despite the fact he's a loving father, he's a husband, he's a successful psychologist and doctor. And, how is it that he's not violent when those tendencies are there? How is it that you can have all of these factors clicked, right? Flipped on. All these switches are just in the right place, but yet he's not out killing people with a chainsaw and running half naked down the staircase in his sneakers. And it's really a fascinating book. And so if you've ever had the moment that you thought, well, maybe I'm psychopathic. Maybe I need to call up Sarah and have her do a test. Maybe I need to ask some questions. It could be. Curiosity is not outside the mind of the psychopath, but they know what emotion to tell you that they're feeling. And when you're talking to a psychopath, saying something like, it was frustrating, their eyes and body language and nonverbal cues aren't necessarily giving you that genuine answer, right? Their eye contact, their body language might be a little too over the top, a little too measured. The actor that is overacting to the point you realize it's an act. Now, a study published in Frontiers in Human Neuroscience in 2014, so this is 2014, this was just a year ago, right, demonstrated that interpersonal distance preferences were reduced in individuals with high levels of cold-heartedness, which is a psychopathic trait tested for in the PCLR. Cold-heartedness, so subjective. Anyway, but that these psychopaths actually preferred shorter interpersonal distances. So what do I mean by that? If you are sitting across the way from a psychopath and you're listening to their language and you're thinking, well, yeah, they're using a lot of conjunctions. They seem to be pretty selfish in their speech. The variations of their structure, yada, yada. Well, in the brain of a psychopath, specifically, the dysfunction of the amygdala region, again, playing a huge role in regulating emotion, also minimizes their personal space bubble, as I call it. And I remember back in the 4th grade, I don't know if you've ever had these experiences in school, maybe I'm unique, where they're teaching personal space. What is appropriate personal space? And everybody had a little hula hoop, and they kind of held it suspended around their waistline with their arms. And you could bump into each other, and you didn't feel so uncomfortable. The hula hoop space, 6 to 12 inches was colleague, friend, acquaintance, and 12 inches or more was conversational stranger, and 20 inches or so was, a bus ride that wasn't overcrowded. But there was a specific distance that is kind of okay in your personal space. Well, that dysfunction of the amygdala is part of that emotional, nonverbal space, and psychopaths tend to not have that. They will brush right up against your cheek or put their face so close to yours you can smell their breath. And it doesn't bother them at all. So it's another kind of interesting concept when you're thinking about how they can use this manipulation to make others feel uncomfortable, how they show their superiority, how they can really infringe upon someone and be that authority. It's like police officers do in interrogations when they get right in your face. It triggers, for the person with a normally functioning amygdala, right? A healthy brain. We get a response. We have an emotional response. The psychopath does not. But of course, I don't get this luxury in handwritten correspondence. So what exactly could I be learning from just handwriting? What exactly does handwriting tell us about a personality or a person's traits? What do we do in profiling when we're looking at graphology or forensic handwriting analysis? What things are we looking for? Well, if you're interested, I want you to keep that sentence you wrote for me, that one that you autographed, and join me after the break here on Mysteries of the Mind as we discuss a little bit of graphology and explore a little bit more about you.
into
And welcome back to Mysteries of the Mind, here with me, your host, Sarah Soderlund. And I hope that you're joining me wherever you are. You can always listen into the TuneIn app, which is what I prefer to use, so I can sit back, maybe have a bath or in your armchair or out on a balcony somewhere. Of course, if you're in Minnesota like me, you're not out on the balcony because it's frigid right now. But with this little El Nino winter that we're having, maybe it's not so bad wherever you are. But tonight, we spent the first half of the show talking about psychopathy and language, and just a little bit about what you know or can tell from the language of a psychopath and some of the research that I'm doing independently on my own. And the second half of the show, I promised you, all of you listeners, that we would cover the basics. I promised not to talk super fast of graphology or handwriting analysis. Now, it is considered a pseudoscience, but to me, I think it's more than that because it's never let me down. Never gonna let me down. It's never let me down, ever. And so when I used to work in customer service, when I was a waitress in college, I always looked at signatures on the credit card slips. And I always looked at, little handwritten messages. And I've always really paid attention to handwriting because I feel like graphology has something to teach us. Grapho, the Greek word for writing, logos, the Greek word for speech, and you see it in anthropology, psychology, biology, geology, all the ologies, right? They can really utilize this, even though it's not a accredited course of study in the United States. It is used by forensic departments independently. And there are certain things that we'll kind of talk about, like question document examination, QDE. It's the forensic science discipline that pertains to documents that are or may be in dispute in a court of law. So if you are watching forensic files at night and they're doing QDEs, handwriting analysis does come into play. It comes into play a lot with comparison documents. Did this person sign this? Is this fraudulent? Is this not? Things that are in dispute legally. But for me as a psychologist, I utilize it a lot when I prefer that people do their assessment paperwork in their own handwriting, not to type it. I prefer that people write out, either in pencil or pen, preferably pen, a little bit about themselves. So to give you kind of a brief, very brief history of handwriting or graphology, obviously it's very old, right? The study of handwriting and its analysis was said to be first developed by the Chinese more than 3,000 years ago. The Romans used it. Through all their civilizations, cultures have analyzed handwriting to identify the essence of a person who produced it. But in 1922, lettopsychogram was used in the charting of personality traits. And that's what is so important in psychology, is and you start seeing in the 1920s using handwriting analysis to evaluate and assess individuals for personality. And there are said to be 40 factors. I find that funny because the PCLR and the psychopathy checklist is also 40 factors. But you score them 1 to 10, and they're evaluated between 2 and 5 data points being evaluated on a score for each factor. If you hate statistics as much as I do, you know that that's kind of but we're looking for rhythms, right? We're looking for patterns. We're looking for data points that are going to give us balance, harmony, consistency, spacing, and slant. Those are the things that we look for in handwriting analysis. Again, balance, harmony, consistency, spacing, and the slant. So as you look down, if you're just tuning in, quickly grab a pen and paper and write down a sentence for me. I always prefer the sentence, my favorite insect is, fill in the gap there. But I want you to look at it. Is there consistency? Is the spacing between your words and your letters? What are the slants? Is it slanting to the left or to the right? Just take a look at your handwriting. Now, there are different types of handwriting, right? There is integrative, holding that specific strokes or structures relate to a personality. There's holistic graphology, which is movement and space, kind of starting from the outside, working into the inside. And there's symbolic graphology, looking for symbols in the handwriting, major and minor symbolism, strokes in relation to the page, minor being strokes in relation to the details. But we are, of course, interested in the characteristics because psychology, yes, I'm a Freudian, we believe that everything in our life around us is an unconscious projection of ourselves. The way that we keep our room, the way that we organize our car, the way that we keep our CDs in those old-fashioned CD slip covers. Are they alphabetized? Is your DVD collection nice and neat, or is they strewn all over the floor? Is your desktop on the computer just 500 things, or is it nicely organized and arranged by item type and in its correct folder? How does your brain work? Because everything in our environment, at least the environment that we can control, is an extension of ourselves. So why would our handwriting be any different? Our handwriting is something that we have with us from the time we learn to write till the time that we no longer can write. And yes, your handwriting does change. When you think about a doctor, for example, and transcribing, certain professions definitely have certain characteristics in their handwriting. Some are taught Roman numerals or things like in medical coding. You can definitely tell with the symbols and characteristics what likely profession the person might be in. But let's cover quickly, not too quickly, some of the major characteristics that we look for. Now, there are over 300 features. 300 when you start getting into handwriting analysis. So it's kind of hard when you start thinking about that and thinking pseudoscience, right? No, when people are handwriting analysis experts, they know there are 300 or more factors, left and right, upside and down, and the basics are just the basics. So the basics are, of course, the slant. Now, when you look at your handwriting, does it slant? Does it slant to the left? Slant meaning lean. Are your letters leaning? Are your words leaning? Or is the sentence leaning? Well, if it's slanting to the right, it not only indicates a response to communication, a response that I told you to write that sentence. It wouldn't be a suicide letter. It would be a response to someone asking you to write a letter, but also how it might take place. For example, the writer may wish to be friendly, manipulative, responsive, intrusive, to sell something, to control something, to support someone. If the handwriting is generally upright, think about that. Sit upright in your chair right now. If you're sitting upright with good posture, describe that. Describe upright, the synonyms indicating independence, strong, stable. If it's a left slant, it shows emotion and reserve. The writer of someone who has a predominantly left slant needs to be true to themselves first and foremost. They can be resentful if others try to push them for commitment. Describing the slant, describing the letters, you kind of do it subjectively and you do it out of context and then you put it back into context with the personality profile. So does yours slant to the right? Are you a communicative person? Are you a responsive person? Or does it slant to the left? Are you more emotional but reserved? Now, look at the size, right? Size does matter, ladies and gentlemen. And handwriting is made up of 3 zones. This, of course, is changing uniquely. We're in a really fantastic time right now, and that children are not always writing their assignments. They're not learning cursive handwriting in public schools much anymore. They don't get college rule notebook lined paper. Instead, they might have a Kindle, a notebook, or a computer at their desk, which is sad to me. But if you do have the opportunity to look at your handwriting on a lined paper, it's kind of made up of 3 zones, and the lines really kind of help break down the zones or cases, which is middle, upper, and lower. An average measure, benchmark, if you will, is kind of judged 3 millimeters per zone. You have that cursive guide over the teacher's blackboard in school, where your cursive F stretches all the way to the top, and it loops there in the middle and it stretches all the way down, and it's that 3 millimeters. It's very balanced. It's the benchmark for the non-remarkable full height of a 9 millimeter letter. Bigger than that is large, less than that is small. Large handwriting, completely going over the lines, really crowding all of the other things, right? It just looks large when you're looking at it. Large handwriting can mean an extrovert, right? They're outgoing, they're larger than life. It can mean the writer puts a whole lot of confidence into their behavior and they don't care about strangers. They're just writing and they're all over the place. Small means logical. And quite rationally the opposite of large. Small handwriting is a thinker, an academic. And depending on the features of the script, it could be delicate, which is unlikely of a good communicator, anyone other than that at a particular wavelength, but you are socially writing small. You're writing for yourself. You're intricate. Maybe you're trying to be over-efficient. You want people to search. You want people to dig. You're not the extrovert, right? It's interesting when you take these characteristics of the handwriting and you apply it to the actual letters, the actual words. One of the most common, and I think when you ask people about handwriting analysis, what's the first thing you think of? They think of pressure. How hard are you writing, right? And there is something to that. Unconsciously, maybe you picked that up along the way because heavy pressure indicates commitment. Man, we're not just fluffing this about. We're serious. We're writing it, signing on the dotted line. It indicates commitment, taking things seriously. But pressure can also be excessive, heavy. The writer can be uptight at times, reacting quickly, overcritical. They may have done things they didn't intend. The writer reacts first and maybe asks questions later. They're impulsive. That's an indicator on the psychopathy checklist. Whereas light pressure shows exactly what light, whimsical, feathery pressure is. It's sensitive to the atmosphere. It's sensitive. It's empathetic to people. It's delicate to the paper. It doesn't want to rip or tear or hurt. It's just ever so lightly there. But what if the pressure's uneven? What if the name or the autograph is really hard, but the sentence was very delicate? If the pressure is uneven, it can show a lack of vitality. You're unbalanced, confused, in need of direction. So take a look at your sentence again. What kind of pressure do you have? What kind of slant do you have? What is the size of your letters? Would you say they're larger than life, or you kind of blend into the crowd like an ant in the scale of the insect world? Now, the next very, very important factor or feature is the upper zone or case of the letters. Your L's, your T's, your H's, not only maybe how you capitalize the words, maybe you do it incorrectly, without note to grammar, what is right and wrong, but tall upper strokes, right? The cursive L or the T's, these long upward letters reaching high. If it reaches really tall, think about that. Think about the kid in class who reaches his hands up and is always asking questions. Just like we would describe these strokes, tall, reaching upward, it's that of ambition. Tall goals, very ambitious. But are they overextended? Are they very extended? Are they unrealistic? Are their expectations real? Are they achievable? Are they reasonably proportioned? Look at the loops. This might indicate someone who likes to think things through or is very imaginable. Wide upper zones indicating more of a tendency to dream up ideas. Girls typically have that more empathetic, loop-de-loop-de, swirly kind of, very imaginative and, ooh, I'm a princess and look at me, right? They're more of this dreamy than writing something. They're more decorative, superfluous, if you will. And if the upstroke goes up and then returns on top of itself, the writer might be squeezing out their imagination, keeping the basic requirements of the job down. But what I love is it also is relative, at least in Freudian psychology, those upper strokes are indicative of positive personality traits. So when you think about maybe they're manic or euphoric or unrealistic, that wouldn't be somebody who's a psychopath. That wouldn't be someone who has antisocial personality disorder. Somebody with antisocial personality disorder has hard, unbalanced, inconsistent strokes, and they don't have high reaching, upward achieving, anything like that. They're lower zones, the G's, the Y's, the P's. That's where we look. The lower loops also have varied meanings. For example, a straight stroke, just that, Y, can be impatience. Just getting the job done, beep. Versus the cradle or the lower stroke. The loop, how does it loop? Can suggest avoidance of aggression, avoidance of confrontation. A full loop, really closing that loop up, especially with heavy pressure, indicates energy, money-making, sensuality problems. Uh-oh. When you're looking at the word favorite, how did that F look? The full lower loop with light pressure indicates a need or wish for security. You really want that closure, safety, locking the door, closing it up, sealing the deal. And of course, there are many varied shapes in the lower zones. It could be unsettled and unfocused. The handwriting can be inconsistent, where the Y's throughout the sentence or throughout the paragraph aren't all the same. Or are they efficiently similar each and every time they are written? Are they meticulous? Or is it impulsive? We literally describe the writing, and then we look and realize that we are describing the person who wrote it. Now, word spacing. This is a huge benchmark, right? It's a basic factor. Is it narrow-spaced or is it wide-spaced? Are you giving me breathing space? And we literally consider it space. Narrow spaces indicate a wish to be with others. They like closeness. But such writers also crowd people. It can be intrusive. It can be that amygdala issue where you don't know spacing or personal space. It can be lack of finesse. Or is it too much space? Isolated, each word avoidant of the others. Unbalanced, without harmony. Now, handwriting samples are actually best in a court document on unlined paper if you are familiar with what writing should look like in consistency. But when you're on unlined paper, you can really get line spacing. Is the person able to, with a long view, keep spacing? Can they keep it balanced? Can the writer or operator keep action? Do they lose their structure? Do they lose their discipline? Do they lose their cool under pressure? Spacing and even page margin really kind of show this. So when you look at your sentence, if you stay indented, you stay to the left margin, that's the root, that's the beginning, that's your family. Are a lot of your positive traits there when you're writing? Are a lot of your ups in the beginning to the left? Or as you get to the right side of the page, they start to dwindle off, people of the future. The top half of your paragraph is your goals, your ambitions, right? You started off the paper, bump, 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 bump. The first two sentences look great. But man, page 3, last sentence, it looks like slop. It can show your lack of energy, your lack of practicality, your lack of long-term motivation and commitment. So all of this margin and spacing is impatience or eagerness. Are you efficient or not? And of course, there are middle zones, there are arcades, there are garlands, the inverted arcade, and there are angles. There are threads and there are wavy lines. But how does this fit into profiling? Well, I've got 2 minutes, right? Because it goes by quickly. But again, handwriting analysis and graphology can determine more than 300 characteristics about a person. Their stress, their optimism, their abuse, disease, even education. It can't determine always the gender or age, but the applications are extremely effective and reliable and indications of personality and behavior. It can be an extremely useful tool for many organizational processes: recruitment, interviewing, selection, team building, counseling, even career planning, employment screening, you name it. Jury screening, medical diagnosis, marital compatibility even. Actually, the uses are quite endless. But for me, I'm using it in relation to understanding the language of a psychopath. Now, if you're interested in this research, if you're interested in learning more, I encourage you to follow me on social networking sites like Twitter or Facebook, which is, of course, / the Paranormal Sarah, or Twitter at Paranormal Sarah. And you can always learn more and directly connect with me on sarahsoderlund.com and learn more, especially if you've got some skepticism. I'm always interested in the Forer effect, the Barnum effect, and other skeptical observations of handwriting analysis, and it's something that I fully intend to use in my understanding language of a psychopath. So if you have any questions or criticisms, comments, or ideas, please don't hesitate to send them my way. And of course, always join me next week here as we talk more on mysteries of the mind. And one last thing, if you like the music, please ask me about more of that, because the music is me and my husband in our home studio. So anyway, touch base with you, and until then.